Okay, so as everyone is joining, I'll start by introducing myself because I'm the least important part of this, and then we'll kick it over to our co-hosts. So my name is Shauna, and I run a content marketing website called Content 151. So I do fun stuff like this every once in a while, which is why I think Kate and Joy, when they had the idea for this, came to me. And so I'm honored to kind of get to play ringleader a little bit. And then Joy's sort of the star of our show, so I'm going to have her introduce herself last. Caitlin, do you want to introduce yourself, known to the great wide internet as Dead Kate Bounce, now Dead Kate Cocktails?
Sure.
Do you want to say hi?
Hi, guys. You can hear me okay, right? Yeah. Perfect. Okay. So Caitlin Cook, Dead Kate Bounce on Twitter, which you might know me by, and Dead Kate Cocktail. So make a lot of drinks. Like kind of a passion of mine. On the professional side, though, I work in asset management and sales. I do have a job in addition to making all of these drinks, but definitely love doing that and very excited to help Joy and Shauna with this today.
Let me jump in and be clear here. There's not one star in the sky, there are three. So let's establish that right now.
Some stars shine brighter, see the sun. So I think Joy gets to be the sun in this scenario because she is a licensed clinical psychologist and counselor. And so she is sort of like the substance. Otherwise, it would just be me and Caitlin bitching about being single, and it would not be much use to anyone. So Joy, you want to...
That worries me a little bit because in our lives, when we put people up on pedestals, the only place to go is down. So please.
Okay, well, you don't have to be on a pedestal, but you can still be the star of the webinar. You can get like at a lectern, maybe. But wait, tell them about you and your connection with finance and also psychology and all of that.
My name is Joy Larry. I am a licensed clinical psychologist and consultant. And I tell people I have the best job in the world. I get to sit behind closed doors with bright, motivated, very accomplished people and have conversations with them all day long that they are not having with anyone else in their life. And, you know, I think there's this misnomer about therapy that people go when they're in crisis or they're really struggling. And that is true. I think a lot of times the things that bring people into therapy is they're really struggling. So maybe they're at a -1 and they think, okay, I'm going to do this to get to 0. But the work I really love is helping people in all spheres of their life go from the 0 to 1 and really up level in all spheres. So how I landed in this wild place that is the world of finance is I worked at a group practice in DC for a while, and one of my colleagues had always said, you know, there's this guy you went to school with, he does this stuff with people and money, and you remind me a lot of him. And that person happened to be Daniel Crosby. So Daniel and I connected and we became fast friends, and he was like, you know, we could maybe use another shrink around here. And there are not a lot of female voices in this space. So he gave me the invite to the party, and here we are.
And just so everyone knows, like, as everyone is joining, there's some chats going on. We wanted this to be collaborative as well. We do have some time baked in at the end for people to ask questions, but you know, Caitlin and I have been talking to Joy a lot in preparation for all of this. So we've already heard what she has to say. So if there is something that you guys want to know or want to chime in with, please feel free to do that. We'll be monitoring the chats and can kind of answer that as we go.
Yes, I want this to be as conversational and interactive and experiential for everybody as possible. So chime in.
Yay. Okay. So let's start over to the poll, which people are still answering. And it looks like we have a good chunk of people who either had their relationships impacted by the pandemic so far or are still figuring that out. The people who said no, I'm very curious as to how you maintained this sort of sense of normalcy through the most unnormal period or irregular period out there. You might have to chime in give advice alongside Joy. So in terms of how we'll structure this webinar for all of us who are still sort of figuring it out and who've had relationships that were impacted, we're going to start with self-love. By the way, everyone please appreciate my Madonna pun. If I had been more coordinated, I would be playing Material Girl in the background right now. I would sing, but no one wants that. So we'll start with self-love, and then we'll progress to dating, then marriage, and then sort of everyone else. But the great thing about Joy in particular and how we've sort of tried to build this is that everything is kind of foundational and should apply across the board, regardless of sort of what stage you're in. But Joy, will you kick us off by kind of explaining a little bit why we decided to do this now and why relationships are so unique right now?
So healthy relationships are hard in the best of times. And let's be clear, we have not been living in the best of times for a prolonged period of time now. And the truth is, when we look back at the last year, everybody in their own ways has been living an existence where we've got this background slow burn of chronic stress. And then depending upon what your experiences have been, there have been these short bursts of acute pain, loss, stress, anxiety superimposed on top of what's always there, which is really at its core survival stress when you're a human living in a pandemic. And when we are under stress, we just naturally regress a little bit. So a lot of people are just not showing up as their best selves. And the truth is, none of us were handed a playbook for how to be a human in the pandemic. So here we are. So that's why tonight we are talking about all things relationships. So boundaries, marriage, dating, because everything in our lives has been impacted this last year.
And we all have to, like, for better or for worse, interact with people all day, every day. I mean, even if you live alone, you're interacting with people in some way or another. So we kind of have to figure this out. It's kind of critical. But if you are like me and Caitlin, you might not love talking about your feelings and relationship things sober. You might, which is totally fine. I'm sure Joy would probably encourage that. But we thought maybe some libations would help make this more fun. So our first cocktail .
Yeah, I'm having connection problems too.
Yes, I just lost Shauna. So
oh, no. She's gone.
Be back. This is life. This is the 2021 brand. So we're on
2020 take two.
Yeah. So I am going to be the designated driver of this discussion tonight. Why don't you kick it off with our first self-love drink, my dear?
Perfect. Okay. So just some background on this too. I guess Shauna had wanted me to sort of mention like the backdrop on how I made this drink, and it's nothing too crazy, but just went home earlier during the pandemic, wanted to see my family, and made some drinks for my mom. She's very excited about the fact that I make a lot of cocktails now, so definitely takes advantage of that. And this is something that's super simple, but very, very much refreshing, and always kind of just a very good drink, no matter kind of the occasion. It's very light, so good place to start off. And we could all use a little like drink or two sometimes. So with that, starting out, I mean, I just have any large glass will do. I mean, it's more for presentation than anything else, but we put some ice in there.
Hey, will you tilt your camera down a little bit so we can see?
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out but I have like I have this bar table thing. Maybe I'll just use that. Hold on. There we go. Okay. Is that better?
Oh, this is fancy.
Well, it was supposed to be a standing desk, but I don't really use it for work. I just use it for drinks. So we'll start with this, but let me move the ice. Technical difficulties. Okay. So you could just mix this all in the glass too. There's really nothing too crazy. If you're looking for like specific cocktail hacks, you usually want to shake things that have something with citrus in it or dairy. Usually that's what you want to shake up. But if there's anything carbonated, you add that after for obvious reasons. It'll just be flat. So we have our glass. And the first thing, and sorry, my kitchen's a disaster right now. I have so many different things in here. We're going to start off with raspberry vodka and limeade. You guys got the instruction list ahead of time, but you can just watch, and we're going to send a list out later. So not a big deal. If you're not making it along with me, that's fine. But first, and the nice thing about making cocktails at home is that you can kind of do this to taste. So if you don't like how any of it is, just add it or make some alterations. So raspberry vodka, we're just going to do 3 ounces. Again, could do more, could do less, depending on your day or what you're feeling. That's fine too.
Keep in mind we have 4 cocktails coming up in this presentation. So if you are making these with us at home, maybe slip or just a designated driver.
Yes. So that is just fine. But okay, so we also have lime juice. You can just use from the bottle too, but I'm a big believer that fresh juice makes everything better. So cut up some limes. Just going to be an ounce of it. You can do that to taste as well, just because I really like sour things, which is, not for everyone, but you can always add more. So
we also had a very hard time finding limeade in Chicago. It's apparently not a very Chicago thing.
I have a good story about that. So I went today, and as you like to say, it was a plot twist because they didn't have any limeade at the store. So what I did was buy lemonade and kind of took some of it out, put lime juice in, and I really like limeade, so I know what it tastes like. And I just am going to go with that. It's good enough. It'll do. We have to make do,
On the fly. That is what so let's be clear, that is what everyone is doing in all areas of their life right now. So
exactly.
You're living it.
And Caitlin was referencing the advice of one of my good friends who likes to say when things go badly, she yells plot twist. And that kind of makes it feel A, like things are going to work out well in the end. And B, it makes it feel a little bit more exciting versus dreadful. So it is a tip that I highly recommend. Shout out to Julie Mosler, who I don't think is here. But
the shrink endorses this. I love this strategy because even if there's something incredibly powerful about the language and then changes how you're feeling about a situation, and our feelings then have a knock-on effect about how we are acting. So
okay, so I didn't want to talk while I was shaking, but so I just put the limeade, vodka, and some extra lime juice in because, again, don't want to put carbonated things in while you're shaking. But then after that, I like things to be a little bit more bubbly, just refreshing, personal preference. You could totally just use limeade with this, but I use club soda. And give or take, when I was making these at home, I was doing it just by eye, but that's not helpful for something like this. So I said around 4 or 5 ounces of club soda or whatever, just to top off your glass if you have room.
How would lime seltzer be?
Lime seltzer, that's just easier. That's just kind of, that's probably the smarter way to do it. It's also more efficient.
They have sparkling limeade in Chicago. They don't have regular limeade, but I found sparkling limeade.
Okay. So then finish this up. But fresh raspberries, I just like throwing a couple of those in, make it kind of pretty. And then I just have a stirring spoon. You can use whatever you want. But while we're talking garnishes, so just cut up a lime. The garnishes don't really do much unless you put them in the drink because they bring out different flavors and whatnot. So it just depends on what you want to do. If it's like a bourbon or whiskey drink, I think it actually makes more of a difference. There's oil that comes out of the peels and whatnot, but not necessary for enjoying your drink. But for these purposes, we're putting on a show. So I have my rind, and they just bend really, twist really easily. So put that there. And there we go. The lighting's not very good, so maybe, I don't know. See how that.
Lovely.
I tried. Work from home issues, but on to the next section.
So take a sip and start to love yourself. So a question I often ask people is, what is the story you are telling yourself in your head? Because that story is going to lead you in a certain direction in your life. So the message we have on repeat all day long in our mind has a very real impact to what I was talking about before, how you are feeling, which then has a knock-on effect on how you are showing up in the world. And what I see a lot is sometimes people create self-fulfilling prophecies simply by what they are telling themselves in their mind. So when you really are able to raise the bar internally on what you know to be true about yourself and what you really at your core believe, you can start to do the same for people on the outside. So if you have a sense, this is my worth and value, if people are treating you in a way that doesn't match that, you're going to start to filter them out. But if on some level you aren't sure how great of a person you are, then when you're being mistreated, you're more likely to accept that and be indiscriminate about who and what you're letting into your life.
I'm back. I'm sorry.
There she is.
Just so everyone knows, we did rehearse this yesterday, and I could keep an internet connection, so I don't know what's happened. But
what's the plot twist?
Did we go through?
This is. I just advanced the slide. This is real life. It does not go according to dress rehearsal, and you have to improvise on the fly, not get thrown off, and just keep going. So, lessons in life.
Did we do the story in your head?
We did.
Okay, so one thing that Caitlin and I were talking about a little bit when we were queuing this up is that sometimes, never when Joy says it, but some of the advice that we hear that comes out of therapy or counseling seems a little fishy. I would say it's a bullshit-o-meter, but I'm trying to be more professional, where one of the phrases is, no one can make you feel anything. And I hear what the concept is, but like if someone says something mean to you, it feels like you're kind of letting them off the hook if you're like, well, you didn't make me feel that way. Like that's on me. So I wanted to have Joy explain this to me again and to everyone else in case anyone else had heard that phrase and found it a bit confusing.
Okay. So first I want to start with our emotions and our feelings. So people tend to kind of categorize feelings as good or bad. Like they aren't good or bad. They actually all have functions. Now, some are more comfortable than others, and it's hard to maybe sit in a state of anxiety or anger, something along those lines. But each of our feelings has a function. Whatever reaction you are having to something, it is giving you some information. Now, when you get that information, then you have a choice what you're ultimately going to do with that. So take, for instance, anger. Anger is something that people often write off as, well, that's bad, I shouldn't be angry. The function of anger is to give you information that something wrong has happened. So anger can actually, if used productively, motivate you and mobilize you to take action. Now, what people choose to do in response to the feelings they are having, that's a different story. Like those are choices that people have to learn to manage. But we can't necessarily control the natural emotional response we have. Now, when I talk to people where I have more conversations about this, no one can make you feel, is oftentimes people take responsibility for other people's emotions. So I hear a lot, well, if I do this, someone is going to feel X, Y, and Z. Well, you ultimately can't control whatever is going to come to the top for the other person, nor can you accurately predict that, because people will commingle what we say, how we show up, with what their own history is, with their own internal experience, and they may interpret that and maybe distort that differently. So if we, in our life, we cannot take responsibility for what is ultimately outside of our control. So their feeling is outside of your control. But what you can take ownership of is how you are communicating, how you are interacting. And practicing empathy. So that ability to step back and ask, how might this person hear what I have to say at this particular time, at this particular place, in the way that I'm saying it right now?
I love that so much, because I feel like we could take a whole separate poll on just the number of people who you.
So we lost Shauna again a little bit. I'm going to jump in here a little bit. I do want to just talk about guilt, because this is another thing that comes up. This idea of, well, someone guilted me into it. So this is maybe a special exception to the emotions have feelings. So let's think about the idea of guilt. The function of guilt is to let you know you have done something wrong, some harm has been caused, and you need to take reparative action. Now, a lot of times people experience guilt that does not fit the situation. So if you are noticing that emotion in yourself, check out if it fits. Ask, did I do something wrong? If you didn't, then that is something that I think it's important to try to unhook and untangle from. And that comes up a lot. I think a lot of times in relationships when there are issues with just dynamics with power and control and manipulation. So that's just something to keep in mind about that one.
Well, I love that. I think hopefully Shauna comes back, but I think a lot of that comes from sort of self-awareness too when you're talking about guilt. Again, did I do something wrong? Did I not? And kind of let that sort of dictate the emotions that you should be feeling, as opposed to kind of what the impulse is,
yes.
Which I know is really difficult to overcome. So kind of easier said than done.
And I think maybe tangentially related to that is a lot of people automatically apologize. And when I see that's something you can overcome. When I see that, I will bring that to somebody's attention and say, are you apologizing? Did you do something wrong? If not, you don't need to apologize.
I'm going to automatically apologize for my internet coming out again. But I have now repositioned my computer on top of the refrigerator, which I think may improve the situation. It's like the tinfoil hat equivalent of the Wi-Fi. Okay, so one of the things that we wanted to do with this webinar was not just talk about our feelings and talk about these things in theory. We wanted to give everyone who's attending action steps for things you can try to put these things into practice in your real life. So I feel like this is quite clever. So we're calling them acts of joy. And Joy, do you want to give us our homework assignment for how we can put self-love into practice?
Absolutely. So first, I want you to pay attention to the story you are telling yourself and ask, is the story I am telling myself pushing me forward or pulling me back? Another strategy I will often use when somebody is engaging in a lot of negative self-talk and are talking to themselves in a way that I would know they would never speak to someone else, is to visualize this. Think about someone sitting at a desk. Now, sometimes you can think about yourself as a younger child, because people tend to have a little bit more compassion with kids. Or think about your best friend or a sibling that you maybe have a healthy relationship with, and say, would you stand there and scream this to them all day long? If not, why is it okay for you? And if you did that, how would you expect them to perform? Their spirit would be crushed. So that's one way to kind of step outside of that self-defeating narrative that may have become so long-standing and so entrenched that it's just automatic. And finally, kind of keep a mental file of and where you are collecting evidence of times that people you trust and you really value their opinion, but they've said things that clearly contradict your negative self-narrative.
I love that. Okay, dating. So if you are married or if you aren't dating out there because, you know, pandemic, still stay tuned because this is a really fun section. And it also has a really fun cocktail name. I'm most proud of this one, Match.Cocktail. So yeah, it's the two best pairings, peanut butter and chocolate.
This is my favorite drink too, so I'm excited. I make these more often than I should, maybe. I guess that's, you know, dependent on you. Can you see this okay?
Yeah, you're good.
Okay. So first, I mean, you guys got the ingredient list. Won't go through that again. But, and this is also, you know, totally voluntary. Chocolate sauce, glass. And you can put this in any glass too, but I like martini glasses. So, and it's not coming out well, but. Does anyone else out there have a huge sweet tooth, or is it just me? Because if so, I guess I'll be drinking this alone.
Chocolate should be optional.
I've been known to use packets if I can't find candy.
So I'm going to mention this too. I'll try to go through this one faster, but I probably should have done this first. But going to rim this with chocolate, because why deprive ourselves of sweet things? Exactly. And I got this. We're going to grate our own chocolate. You can do chocolate shavings if you want. I think it's more fun to do this way. And it looks more fun too. So, sucker for presentation. But we will see.
And let's take a moment to talk about deprivation. The moment you tell yourself you can't have something, you become more preoccupied with it. So that's a different webinar, but let's put a pin in that and just think about that.
Yes. Okay. Glass. Should have done this first. Not a problem. Rim the entire thing. Just go once around or so. If you see any spots that are uneven, you can fix that. That's fine. And then
Caitlin, I'm regretting the decision to not do this from your house because then I could be drinking that when you're done.
You would, and you would love it, but you can come by another time and do it too, so that's fine. You know where I am. Okay, well, we tried our best with the grater. We have it. I know it's a little hard to see in my interesting lighting right now, but we have chocolate, we have chocolate shavings, all the good stuff. Let's get to it. First of all, peanut butter whiskey. This is an absolute godsend. I had never tried it until semi-recently, and it's just to die for. It's unbelievable. I'm not a whiskey fan myself, and it's just, you can't not drink it. It's just too good. So, gonna put ice in our shaker. Usually, I mean, people can comment on this too, because I'm not a huge whiskey connoisseur. I'm like newer to it, but not usually. I don't think in cocktails you're usually supposed to shake things with like whiskey or bourbon in it. This is the exception. You don't have to shake this, but it does have a lot of dairy things in it. So, I mean, there's about to be dairy in it. So I think it provides a nice frothiness, but up to you. Still going to taste good no matter what. Okay. And then I got chocolate liqueur, just an ounce of that. I recommend the Godiva. It's incredible. If you can find it. And then just, I'm not even going to try to pronounce this because I'm mispronounce it, but creme de cacao, I think. Just an
last time we did this, someone on the chat knew how to pronounce it properly. So does anyone know?
Yeah, last time I called Cointreau last time. I don't even know what I called it last time, but it wasn't right. So someone very kindly corrected me. The more you know. And then just heavy cream, just 2 splashes of that. First one was a little big.
And as a reminder, everyone's going to get a handout at the end with all these ingredients.
Okay. Gosh, everything's sliding. Okay. Just pour that in. And so this is entirely optional what I'm doing now, but I think that it adds an extra layer of fun, personally. So just a little extra heavy cream, couple splashes in. If you have a frother, you can do this. If not, I haven't figured out another way to do this successfully, so I apologize. But just a splash of the chocolate syrup, chocolate sauce. And then I add a little bit of vanilla extract, but you don't necessarily have to do that. So this is just for foam on top of the cocktail. I think it sort of adds a little something to it. So have all that in here. Is my frother dead? Okay, the frother's dead. Plot twist. So we're gonna not do that. But typically, so I froth this, coat the whole top with it, delicious, kind of creamy finish on it. But we're not doing that today, so that's fine. We got this. We have all the important ingredients, and there she is.
Ooh, that looks so pretty.
Yeah, no, it looks really, it's very easy to make look good too, because you just need to throw a bunch of things in there, and it tastes delicious. So anyone making this along with me, cheers, and I will throw it back to you guys.
Excuse me. So the attachment section is actually kind of one of the things that started and inspired this webinar. So Joy, you use attachment theory in terms of how you help people deal with their relationships. I know we're going to get into like the different types of attachment, but can you explain sort of what attachment theory is? And we are giving away a book about this later at the end if you stick around. So, but as a preview, Joy, what is attachment theory?
So as a clinician, one of the many lenses that I look through as I try to understand people and maybe how they are showing up in their lives and unwittingly getting in their own way is through the lens of attachment theory. And some people maybe hear that, and if you've ever heard of it before, maybe your mind goes to like a magazine cover of a woman breastfeeding. Like that's not what I'm talking about. But attachment really has to do with our own, like a real sense of security and how we respond to separation, what causes anxiety. Because relationships are like the glue of life. And the way we interact with other people, certain pattern responses are kind of triggered. And I'm not going to go deep into the neuroscience, but some of these connections we have in our brain, what connections that are made early on and they help us kind of predict how other people will interact and respond to us. So neurons that fire together wire together. So some of those early experiences, like that's not Freudian nonsense. We carry some of that forward. Now, the good news is different relational experiences we have throughout our lives can modify how we learn to trust, how we learn to love, how we learn to communicate, how we learn to tolerate separateness. So when we think about attachment styles, it impacts how we view intimacy, how we manage conflict with people, how we think about sex, how we communicate what our wishes and needs are, and how we develop expectations about how others are going to act and respond to us in our relationships. So go
ahead. You're on a roll.
I'll dive right in. So there are 4 primary attachment styles that people have. Now, first is someone who's secure. So this is about 50% of the population. So someone with a secure attachment style is going to be flexibly comfortable with closeness and proximity. So when there's a disruption in a relationship, or what I will sometimes call a rupture, it trusts that there will eventually be a repair. So an example is, I can get angry and fight with you and not think, okay, that means this relationship is over, so I'm just going to burn it all down. You understand, you're able to hold a little bit more nuance when you think about other people and relate to them. Now, someone who's operating from a secure base, they're likely going to be more collaborative and see others as more reliable and consistent. Now, someone who's avoidant, avoidance an anxious attachment style and a disorganized attachment style actually all have to do with a kind of anxiety. And I just want to say about anxiety, we all experience it. It is adaptive. People experience it at different times and on a continuum, but it's a natural human response. But as we think about attachment and we think about avoidant attachment, this is someone who on the surface is going to equate self-reliance with safety. So they have a really hard time trusting that someone is going to be there. And underneath the surface, that is really, really stressful. But on the surface, they may seem calm, cool, and collected, but they are going to keep everyone at a safe distance. And what feels safe for them tends to be several arms length away. So this may be in a relationship, someone who seems really unavailable. That may be what's happening underneath. And I think a lot of times this comes from a place sometimes of loss, or times when you've kind of learned, I can't trust that the other person that other people are going to show up for me and meet the needs I have. So this is what I have to do on some level to self-protect.
I feel like I just went to therapy a little bit, Joy. You're like just walking through my commitment issues in front of all of these nice people.
So someone with a more anxious attachment style, this is someone who is preoccupied with proximity. So they desire a really high degree of closeness and experience significant distress when there is either real or perceived unavailability. And that can be physical, that can be emotional. So an example, and some of this is sometimes it doesn't even, an anxious response doesn't feel like it fits the relationship or the situation. So I can think of a client I had who she had an anxious attachment style because of things she had experienced earlier in her life. And she was in this relationship with this great guy who was very loving. And he went on a trip with friends, and like she knew rationally, like things are okay. This is a trustworthy guy. Nothing is going to happen. But she just had this constant state of panic while he was away. So that's an example of sometimes older stuff plays out in current relationships. Now, finally, is a disorganized attachment style. And this you're going to see with someone who's maybe experienced a lot of trauma. And in some ways, it feels like a mishmash of both of these styles. Because people are going to kind of vacillate between I need you, I need you, I need you, and stay far away. So like the relationship is like this. And someone with this disorganized style and way of showing up, they're maybe going to send a lot of mixed signals, be much more emotionally erratic, someone you would maybe call very hot and cold. And maybe you feel like you need to walk around eggshells around that because you don't quite know the person you're going to get. Now, one of the difficult things about dating is that often the avoidant partners tend to get recycled back into the pool more often than other types. So that may feel like it may be part of the reason why you're doing the dating thing, which is already hard, but you're like, why are these people just flaking out? That may be part of the picture.
So where would posting my bad dating stories onto Instagram fall on this spectrum of attachment and or tweeting about bad first dates?
So I wouldn't put that anywhere on the spectrum. I think that is you just being authentic about how hard it is to like figure this stuff out. Like relationships are messy. So I'm just going to say.
This is Kate's I call bullshit question, but it was also inspired by Ashley. Are you still on? This was a chat we all had. Kate, I'll let you take it.
The why smart people date people who treat them badly, even though you know that rationally you'd think that they would kind of be able to piece together if something wasn't working or if the person was treating them poorly, but yet there's still some sort of, you know, veil that, you know, makes it so they can't fully see that from the inside. It's almost like you need someone from the outside to sort of tell you, or you take a step back. Or Jory, I'd be kind of curious, especially on your take on this.
Absolutely. So oftentimes really smart, really intelligent people find themselves in very unhealthy relationships, and the people around them, or even sometimes they themselves, can see the pattern and are like, why do I keep getting pulled back into this? And really the reasons we have for the ways we interact in relationships are not even fully conscious, and they're really complex. But a lot of them stem, I believe, first from how you see yourself. So if we think about self-esteem, when people are pulled back into relational ditches, it isn't because they're not smart or they're not rational. Sometimes it's because they're scared, they're confused, and maybe they're questioning on some level whether if there is really something better. And if there is, do they really deserve it? So if you at your core aren't sure you believe that you should be treated really, really well, or haven't had that experience to even know what that's like, that can pull someone back in. And related to that is, we as humans, we favor, again, I think unconsciously, what is familiar and what is known over what is new and unpredictable. So if your history has been chaotic, full of drama, like that doesn't feel good, but you know the way that goes. So that's why sometimes people get pulled back into that, and why it's so important then throughout your life that you start to have more corrective relational experiences.
You might say it's sunk cost versus opportunity cost if you were into finance or economics.
As we debated in the chat prior to this conversation, possibly.
It's possible that, yeah, we might be so focused on our sunk costs that we're not just like, oh, hey, those are sunk costs and opportunity costs out there.
The chat just said that too. Lindsay knows sunk cost fallacy. Yes.
There's actually very good.
So a way to think about that is, if you were just starting a relationship with someone who is treating you like this, would you keep giving them a chance? If not, I think a lot of times what happens with sunk costs is people think, well, maybe if I just give it a little bit more time, somebody's going to change. And then the more time you have invested, the more years of your life, the more you have given to this person, it becomes really hard to cut your losses, step back. But until you do that, you do not have space in your life, in your heart, for something that's going to be healthy or ultimately better for you.
Well, and we talk about that a little bit more coming up in the marriage section. Maybe not in so much as walking away, but in terms of, well, I don't want to give it away. So we talk about this a little bit more coming up. So, but before we get to that, what are the acts of joy that we can use to get better at dating really quickly?
So first, remember, and this is in all relationships in your life, you teach other people how to treat you through your boundaries. If you do not set limits, the world will choose them for you. Next, I think we need to pay really close attention to how people treat others and how people show up early on. People follow themselves around. So don't have this hope that someone is magically going to change, because that is highly unlikely. And next, just really work on prioritizing you. Your most important relationship is with yourself, because that is at the core of how you are going to interact with other people.
And I'm guessing you don't necessarily just mean drinking lots of yummy cocktails, but also just taking care of what you need in terms of relationships and from people.
Yes.
Okay, so sequentially after dating comes marriage, then the baby carriage. So we'll get those two in this section. This is my favorite metaphorical cocktail out there because Caitlin was like, I feel like I should do a bourbon cocktail, even though I don't like bourbon. And I also don't like bourbon. And we were kind of like, well, sometimes in marriage, you have to do things that you don't love because the other person loves them. And so we figured out a way to make bourbon palatable. And we figured that was a nice metaphor here. Or Caitlin figured out a way to make bourbon palatable.
Yeah, no, and I think it is a nice metaphor because I don't love bourbon. I'm warming up to it, and there's always going to be things that I probably don't like about it, but you can enjoy the thing, or you can kind of choose to focus on the things that make it a little bit sweeter. So the blackberry brandy, raspberry juice, lemon juice in this case, but in life, you know, it could be a lot of different things. And starting out, so I don't know, is anyone else on here a bourbon drinker? If you aren't, you probably know someone who is, but that's fine. It doesn't matter. Make them either way in case someone enjoys them. But
yeah, lots of bourbon drinkers, Caitlin. Lots of people said yes.
Okay, perfect. Well, that's a good answer. Okay, so, and the more well-versed people in this can kind of correct me on this. Bourbon is your drink of choice. That is great. Okay.
I thought it was.
I don't really like shaking bourbon drinks. I think it should be stirred and not as I've done some reading on it, and I think I've seen kind of both ways that you shouldn't shake bourbon drinks, or you can, or it doesn't matter. I'm just gonna stir this though. If you have like a bartending kit, or you have a regular spoon, actually, you can just stir all of this together, and it doesn't really kind of disrupt things quite as much. But I have some ice in here. I want to chill it. I don't want to put ice in there to water it down too much. So we'll just, chill it temporarily. And I didn't put enough bourbon in there because I figured out my own recipe. So 2.5 ounces of bourbon. And then after that, I like fresh juice again. We're going back to this. So it's around, I said like half an ounce of lime juice or something like that. But I have a whole one here. I'm using the Meyer lemons that were recommended that are far superior to regular lemons. I didn't believe it. I bought them last night. I can actually confirm that they are quite good. They're a little bit less sour. So that's kind of the appeal for them in cocktails. But what really makes this drink is the blackberry brandy. There's kind of a light reflecting on it, but this is delicious. I know people who drink this on its own because it's just very good. So we're going to add that to this. We're going to sweeten it up. Again, don't love bourbon, but we're going to make the most of it with what we have. So an ounce of that. And then just an ounce of, you could do 2 ounces.
For 2021.
So then, you could do 2 ounces of just the blackberry brandy if you don't want to get into buying more and more ingredients. I totally get that. But I do have raspberry liqueur. So just an ounce of that as well, just to balance the bourbon out a little bit. Again, the nice thing when you're at home is you can kind of mess around with the proportions yourself. And then dry vermouth, just a little bit. It's pretty. I feel like that's a very prominent taste too. So we're just gonna add just a little bit here, just a half an ounce. Put that in. And then, like I said, we're just going to stir it. I'm not really into the whole shaking my bourbon cocktail thing. It would probably taste fine, but rule of thumb from the very little research that I've done on this so far is that you're not really supposed to that often. So we're just going to go with that. If it's on the internet, it has to be true, obviously.
Ooh, that was yummy.
Yeah, so it has a really nice color. And I'm big on the garnish, so you really don't have to do this. You really don't. But the lemon, the oils in the lemon rind, though, they do. I never really believed this until I started reading into it more, but they really do add the oils from the actual rind itself. You can keep it outside of the drink, but if you put it in the drink, it is inherently going to kind of give off those oils, and that's going to get into the cocktail. It's probably subtle, it is subtle, but if you have a very refined palate, you might notice. So throw it out there. put it kind of half in, half out, I guess is fine. Cool. All right. Well, there we go. Very pretty color. Again, the lighting in this apartment is not great, but got a little lemon twist.
Yum.
Cheers. It's good. So, you just have to work with what you have, and you can find a way to like it no matter what, which is, compromise, which is probably what we're going to be talking about on these next slides.
Well, so when we started talking about marriage, I was very obsessed with asking Joy about what people come in to see her about most when they're married, because I know what my friends tell me about, whether it's spending time with their kids or, it's one person is putting in all the work and one person isn't. So I asked Joy why people come in to see her and what the common themes are. And that's what the first couple of slides here are about.
So the main reasons couples first come in the door are because they're fighting about sex and they're fighting about money. So that's probably not a surprise to anybody, but the truth is it's not about sex and it's not about money. It's about really the issues that are underneath that. So it's about power, it's about control, it's about freedom, it's about trust, it's about security. And that's what you have to get at. Now, I was explaining as we talked about couples therapy and this, sometimes one person wants to start and the other person is like, and they almost feel like they're being dragged into it. I tell people this will not work unless both parties, it is a waste of time and money, yours and mine, if both parties aren't really invested and don't want to do this work. And I explained really the best couples work happens when both members are in their own individual psychotherapy. Because in order for healing and repair to happen when there's problems in a relationship, both parties need to look in the mirror and own what they are contributing to the problem. Because almost all dynamics in relationships are co-created. And you can't control what the other person is doing. And as soon as you start with, well, that you're doing this, you're doing this, you're doing this, that's going to elicit a defensive response from the other person, and no work is going to get done, and you're just going to spin in circles. So, and sometimes one member of the couple really wants to change. I'm like, okay, that's great. You need to start with you, and you just have to start showing up differently. The other person, that will have a knock-on effect on the system. When one person starts to change, it can't not impact everybody else. Now, consciously and unconsciously, that going back to we want what's familiar, not what's better, the other person will try to pull that other party back into an old familiar role. But if at least one person can anchor and hold their ground and showing up healthier, eventually the system does respond.
And sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I think I might have put this slide up too soon.
No, you're good. We can jump to this.
No. But it feels like there's such connecting themes between what you're saying there and then these angles that you're going to talk about and what we were talking about in the dating section about when to walk away and like how to prioritize your needs and how to detach yourself from someone who is pulling you back or who is bad for you and those types of things. So I love the angles thing because I think it sums it up quite cleanly for people.
So this is something I talk with couples about, but really I talk about it a lot in individual work because the truth is people are coming into therapy and talking about the rest of the people in their life who really need to be in therapy. So I discuss with people this idea of underfunctioning and overfunctioning in relationships. In healthy relationships, there's reciprocity. It's not always 50-50. And I think the healthiest relationships happen when both people go in 100-100 and are committed to bringing their best self and putting it fully behind their partner. When you have that kind of security, you're more likely to be giving, and it creates this positive upward spiral. But that doesn't always happen. So sometimes, and you can maybe think about relationships in your life. I bet everyone could identify someone when you were like, I'm working a lot harder than the other person on making this relationship work. And
the overachievers in this group, you think that we would do that? That does not sound like anyone here.
So this idea of so overfunctioning is a problem. It leads to you get tired, you get exhausted, and what is worse, it creates resentment, and resentment is corrosive relational rust. But in order for there to be kind of a rebalance of roles and energy in the relationship, it requires the person. So if we picture a relationship like this person is over functioning. So they're doing more than half of the work, or this way. So they're doing more than half of the work. In order for this other person to step up and meet them in the middle, this person is going to have to lean back a little bit to create some space. Now that can be really scary because some things may get dropped. And this can be really, really hard when there's kids. And if it feels like one partner is bearing a lot of the burden, and what I often hear is, well, if I don't do this, I can't trust the other person is going to. And when there are like children in the balance, that's hard. But if there's going to be any meaningful change, there needs to be space and opportunity for the other person to step up. If you are holding all the rope, you've got to you've got to put down the slacks so that the other person will pick it up. Now, then you have to decide, I'm going to give it X amount of time and opportunity and see what the other person does. So you kind of put the ball in their court, and then you see, okay, are you going to play or not? And if that person is demonstrating over time that they are not interested in stepping up, then you'll have to, then the ball is back in your court, and you have to decide, okay, now that I know this is what this person is showing me, what am I going to do with this?
So like going back to the dating example, if someone is treating you badly by being like neglectful or by not putting as much into it, if you pull back then and they don't lean in, then you kind of have to call their bluff.
Yeah.
And it can be really tough.
It can.
I don't know. And then
oh, sorry. I was just going to say, at what point in that sort of balancing act do you have to decide that it's just kind of a loss? I don't know if lost cause is really the right word, but at what point do you have to sort of protect yourself and be conscious of, where you're spending all of your energy if it's just sort of going in sort of a tug of war sort of deal?
I think it depends upon the context, the situation. So there's not one right or easy answer. But one metaphor I use with people is a parking meter. At some point, like you have a finite amount of money that you are putting into a parking meter. And that is your emotions. That is your time. And at some point, if you are putting money into a parking meter you realize is broken, this goes back to some cost again, you need to say, okay, before I run out, I need to hold on to some so that I can go find another parking meter and start using that so that I can get to where I want to go and do what I need to do.
Just don't invest that money in GameStop instead of another parking meter. And if you do invest it in GameStop, don't do it because you're living alone in your parents' basement. Don't prove Scott Galloway right. So we just did a little quick survey here in terms of who has kids or is going to have them. And this is one I asked Joy to put in here because I get this from friends of mine who are in the process of starting their families in terms of how they balance their own relationships and focusing on their kids and what is the appropriate amount of attention to give your kids versus your partner, and that back and forth.
So you love your partner and you love your kids differently. So I think it's important not to see it as either or. But what I see happen a lot is that when a couple focuses so much on their children to the detriment of their marriage, like they are not leaving anything for their partner because they're telling themselves, well, the child needs me, is dependent on me, and that has to be the priority. That can create a lot of problems. The truth is the healthiest kids come from healthy families. You have to think about, as parents, what do you want to model to your child about what a healthy relationship is? Because what they see, what they experience in your home, that's going to be their template for, well, this is how marriages work. This is how people are treated in relationships. It goes back to what is familiar. That's what they're going to gravitate back to. So if your marriage is falling apart, like, kids pick up on far more than people give them credit for. That's going to have a detrimental impact on children. So make sure that you are continuing to nurture your marriage as your children grow. Because sometimes what happens is people focus so much on their kids and they haven't been nurturing their marriage. After 18 years, like, the kids are going to leave. You need to make sure that you have something left when it's you and your spouse.
What are the acts of joy for preserving your marriage?
So I like to think about spirals up and spirals down. So if you find yourself spiraling down, ask, what can I do to interrupt this cycle? And usually the best thing to do that is to ask yourself, what does my partner need right now? And it can be hard to do that, because if you're spiraling down, you can tell, well, my needs aren't being met, so why should I meet their needs? But someone at some point has to interrupt that downward drain. And something that I practice in my own marriage and I think is great is, again, having regular communication. So deciding in advance you're going to check in and just touch base and connect with your partner about a few things. So having a practice of asking these questions is great. So this last week, what was something that brought you joy? This last week, what was something that was hard for you? This last week, was there anything you left unspoken that we should probably talk about? And what can I do for you specifically this upcoming week? And then make sure at least once a month, you're having an explicit conversation, checking in about your finances and your sex life.
Love it. I'll always like to have a nice hook to keep people coming back with money and sex. So it's funny, we're running out of time. So I was seeing if Caitlin could just briefly walk us through the different types of the classic martini, which is you do you. And I may have also said that because I know that she's going to try and make a gin martini. And obviously the only way to make a martini is with vodka, very, very dirty with olives. So she's wrong.
Well, you can't go wrong with that. When I started, I mean, the first time I ever had a dirty martini, it was with you pre-COVID at a bar, and I tried yours. So
you hated it.
Yeah, it was the first time. So, and I think when I had started out, more vodka martinis were definitely the go-to because flavored vodka is incredible. It was an easy way to ease into it. But classic martini, gin, dry vermouth, and then the nice thing with that is, and we called it the You Do You classic martini. Shauna, go ahead first.
I was going to say there is a wrong way. Peter, I think, said no, there was no wrong way. There is. Gin is eating a Christmas tree, and that is wrong, and we should definitely oppose it.
Well, that is the difference in taste buds. Yeah, that's just a difference in taste buds. You pick your liquor, that's totally fine. Dry vermouth's a constant. The nice thing with this is the optionality of it with the garnishes and juices that you can use. And I just listed a few. And that's kind of why we call it the You Do You, because, I mean, it's really up to what your preference is, and you can kind of make it your own way and make it for yourself, which is great. So between gin and vodka, but usually dry vermouth, that's kind of a constant. With a regular one, if I use fruity vodka, I don't typically put dry vermouth in. That's just me. I'm not, professional or anything. But anyways, so putting in different kind of what best appeals to your taste buds or what you prefer. I personally prefer lemon, so I just use, this juicer with some fresh lemon juice, squeeze that in there, and then I'll put a little lemon twist or lemon slice on the side. Shauna likes vodka instead of gin, which is great. Vodka's good too. And she likes it extra dirty with lots of juice and olives. So, yes. So you can do that, and you can use grapefruit too. So you can use anything, actually. You can use a bunch of things. But those are just a couple of examples. Very simple. Keep it kind of classic. But you can go a lot of different ways with that and make it your own too. So you do you.
Well, and that is a good segue in terms of like our drink preferences are a lot like love languages, right? Where we learn, we have our preferences and the people we are with have theirs. And like if I'm with Caitlin, I might serve her a Christmas tree because I love her and I know that that is a thing she likes. And that works in love languages too, but I'm doing a pretty shitty, job of explaining it. Joy, will you do the official explanation for these?
Absolutely. So the way you give love is oftentimes how you really expect or really want to receive it back from other people. So you may be missing gestures of I love you or I care about you from lots of people around you, even though they're there. And similarly, your attempts to tell someone you appreciate them may be falling flat because we speak different affection dialects. So knowing yours really takes time, and it's important to learn those of your family, of your friends, and even your team at work. So thinking about how much you value and what really communicates you matter. So is it words? Is it someone giving you gifts and putting a lot of time and thought into that? Is it spending quality time? Is it doing something for you? Acts of service. This is my, like, clean the kitchen for me and you were like my best friend. And for some people it's physical touch. And it's not, so people's love languages, it's not just one, but we tend to have kind of a hierarchy of how important these things are.
So I want to pull up Kristen's question here. If you're missing a gesture, is that similar to emotional bids or are those separate things? I don't know what emotional bids are actually.
Can you explain what you, can you expound?
Sure, wait, I might be able to invite Christian to come on and talk if you want to, you're invited.
Christian is literally a block over from me right now. He should have come over for this, but we could have coordinated that a little bit better.
You guys able to hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Whoa. Hi, Christian.
I tried to like the webcam, but it said only 3 webcams are allowed on at a time. Okay. So I don't know all of them off the top of my head. I should have pulled something up where I have it, but kind of what I know of emotional bids is kind of something where like you're kind of like reaching out to try and, I don't know, dig into someone's emotions or like kind of try to create a connection. So they're almost like half attempts. So it'd be like if someone said, "Oh, my day was really tough," and then that there is like an emotional bid, and kind of like the response to it is whether you accept, deny, or ignore. So someone says, like, "My day is really tough." If I care and I want to connect with that person, I say, "Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. Tell me more about it." Or kind of ignoring as if someone said, "Oh, my day was really tough," and you say, "Huh, too bad," and kind of don't really ask them about it. Or the denial, which is, someone said my day was really tough, and you say, "No, it wasn't. Like, it was sunny outside. Like, I know something good happened at work. There's no way your day was tough." So kind of like there's that thing, or just it's somewhat of like taking an interest in your partner's activities.
So I see them maybe a little bit as separate things, but I really like what you brought up because, and this, again, it's all relationships. People put out little bubbles and give us tidbits of information about themselves, about their experience. And then it's up to us, what are we going to do with that? When we hear that, how do we respond? So I think paying attention and asking yourself, what is this person trying to communicate to me when you are saying that? So that, I think that's what's going on there, and really doing your best to show, okay, I'm making an attempt to be attuned. I hear you. sometimes if you aren't sure what to do, asking what's going to be most helpful to you right now. I can tell you're distressed. And a gold question for relationships when you are seeing someone in distress is, right now, do you need me to listen or do you need me to provide a solution? Because often people are far too fast to jump to a solution because they're uncomfortable. They're uncomfortable sitting with someone in their distress. So they think that's going to be the most helpful thing, but sometimes that can be really invalidating. Our presence sometimes is much more powerful and what people want more than our answers.
I love that. I'm always a solution person, so I always have to remind myself, like, can I offer you, do you want feedback? Can I offer you feedback? Like, or do you want me to sit and listen?
And some people want that, but they maybe just aren't ready to take that.
I think sometimes
So
it's poorly received as well.
Timing matters a lot.
Well, the other thing that I've noticed too with love languages is like, if you can figure out another person's, and I think it does a lot to improve understanding that people care about you. Like, I noticed it with my dad. His love language is acts of service, and I was waiting for like words of affirmation. And when I realized that every time he would like clean the snow off my car, that was him saying "I love you," I was like, oh,
yes,
oh,
yeah. That is.
And so we were talking about how like this could play out even in the workplace, whether it's your boss or your direct reports or your coworkers. If you can figure out how they're trying to say they appreciate you, like if you have a direct report who's waiting for you to say great job on that and you don't say it, they could be crushed and demoralized. You could lose a good employee. But also like some love languages are not super work appropriate, physical touch, but even gifts sometimes not. So we were pressuring Joy yesterday to come up with some ideas around how you can use love languages to help relationships in like at work or other places.
Yeah. So I think about the context of the relationship and the situation and what is going to be reasonable. And it really, again, depends upon the context and the situation. You need, especially in the workplace, you need to think about kind of outside optics of what you're doing, how other people may perceive or misperceive that, and boundaries with physical stuff at work. People who've dated people at work and have had it gone sour know it gets messy. So there's that.
Yeah. I also wanted to make sure we wrapped everything kind of back to what we were talking about at the beginning, which is why we're all talking about this now and during the pandemic. And, you know, communication was one, isolation was another one. I mean, I shared out an Economist article, but I know I've talked to, I don't know if Graham is still on, but a few other people about some of the Scott Galloway comments about, you know, lonely guys in the basement crashing this or driving up stock prices, or girls who are obsessed with social media, and like just what the pandemic has amplified and some of our already trending toward loneliness and isolation habits with, you know, gig economy and being by ourselves a lot. So, you know, you have your words of joy here about the highlight reels, but also just about finding connections, communicating with your voice. So what's sort of your like final words of joy kind of summary on some of this?
So I think especially throughout the pandemic, people are connecting device to device. And with so much time on social media, I think it's just so important that you remind yourself you are only seeing the highlight reel. No one is sharing everything that's going on. So as you're thinking about your interactions and really need to have empathy, know that there is a story that everyone is living that you know nothing about. And the people that you are maybe putting on a pedestal are making it up as they go on some level. And to the extent you can, when you are having important conversations with people, try to use your voice. So much can get lost in DMs, in text, even in email. So just hold that in mind as you are thinking about your interactions in the days and months ahead.
I will even say Caitlin and I had our first ever fight like a year plus into our friendship making this webinar. And it was because we had our wires crossed completely over typing. And as soon as we got on the phone, it was like, what? That was very weird. So that was we learned that one firsthand. And I feel like we see that even in like how quickly you respond, especially if you're multitasking. It's easy to just type something off because you're trying to work. And I don't know. I think that's an important one to remember. I asked Joy if she would add it to her acts of joy so that I could remind myself about that one, but using your voice for important conversations. But you use that in your own practice too, right,
Yes.
Joy?
So I tell clients out of the gate, we will not text, and we are using email for appointments, logistics only, because it's just too relationally risky for stuff to get lost.
And then the other acts of joy were?
So, as we think about your interactions with people, step back and think about potential context. What else are you maybe not seeing? And ask, are you being too critical? Right now, this is a time to extend grace to other people and grace to yourself. Have self-compassion, but don't confuse that for giving yourself or other people a pass for really negative, hurtful behavior.
And then we are over. We can use the people who were attending here to do the giveaway via email if everyone's okay with that. But I do want to make sure that if anyone had any questions before we wrapped up, that they got a chance to ask them. Does anyone have anything? We covered a lot, so I wouldn't be surprised if we covered enough that you don't have any questions. I wouldn't be surprised if anyone did. Okay. Well, before we sign off, just a quick reminder of where you can find us and what we all do. Joy is at joyleary.com. Caitlin now has a new Instagram for her cocktails too. So if you want to follow that, it's really fun. And then you can find me. If I found you and tracked you down here, you're probably not getting rid of me anytime soon.